Okay, so we're going to start. Welcome to the Smurfit Stone Community Advisory Group. I'm Jerry Dellis. I'm part of the admin team. I'll start with our introductions. I'm going to start with you, David.
Hi, David. I'm a GSI environmental.
Hi, I'm Kelsey. I work in pollution prevention, and I live in Houston, so local too.
I'm Buddy. I'm a local Houston, and I'm taking notes.
Will Security, Senate District 49.
Dave Stromeyer, Missoula County Commissioner, and Juanita Vera, Missoula County Commissioner when she comes back.
And Bruce Sims, husband of mine. And I'm the CAG administrative team.
And he's a new horse wrangler.
All right. Yeah, I did that too.
Yeah, Elena Evans. I work for the health department in Missoula County.
I'm Jen Hurst, I'm part of the admin team.
Mary Price, staff, Confederated Salish and Creepy Tribes.
Debbie Lester, community member and representing the school board.
And Chris, excuse me. And Chris, Chris Water Technologies in Missoula, and I'm part of Quality Advisory Council.
Brian Chapman with the Clarksville Coalition.
Sims with Missoula.
Donovan Power with Haley Elvis. Jason Williams, Tucson resident.
Aaron Williams, Houston resident, and West Valley Community Council.
David Frisbee, I'm the interim chief for French Town Park.
Courtney Rosenberg, I'm a grad student at the university.
David Schmetterling, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks.
Carolyn Weiss, APEX.
Super. So that's our group here. We're going to go ahead and go online, and I'll go ahead and start with you, Laura.
Yeah, Laura Lundquist, Missoula Current.
Sheila?
Sheila Wolf, community member.
Brian. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Brian with the Montana Natural Resource Damage Program.
Nick?
Yeah, I'm Nick Gerhard. I've just been helping Bruce Sims a little bit with some data collection on the Clark Fork stream flows.
Okay.
I'm a retired hydrologist in Idaho.
Audrey? We'll come back to you, Audrey. Are you there? Okay, how about Ben?
Hi, everybody. Ben Coleman, University of Montana.
And Catherine?
Catherine LaCour, EA Engineering, Science and Technologies.
Dawn?
Hi, Dawn Nelson with the Department of Public Health and Human Services.
Isabel?
Hello, my name doesn't reflect it, but I'm with the Montana DEQ, new attorney as of about a month, and I am the new site attorney. So very nice to meet you all.
Thank you. And you are in Helena?
I sure am. Yep.
Okay. Isabel, can you go down? Katie.
Hi, Katie Garson-Forba. I am the Bureau Chief for Superfund, Abandoned Mine Land and Construction with DEQ, and I'm based out of Helena.
Okay, did we do Logan already?
I don't think so.
Logan, go ahead.
Hey, I'm at University of Western Australia, just ex-community member, keeping in touch.
Nice. Cool. And it looks like Mackenzie. There, Mackenzie? EPA.
I saw them on a.
Yep. Got it. Sorry. New technologies in our conference space. Hi, everybody. I'm Mackenzie Meter, Community Involvement Coordinator with EPA. I'm Allie Archer.
Yep, there you go.
Oh, thanks. The Project Manager for EPA, Helena.
Hi, and I'm Carolina Ballou. I am the Montana Section Supervisor.
You get everybody? Let's see. It looks like Chris Stark. Hi.
He's still new. Chris hasn't been admitted.
Oh, you have to admit him.
You guys, anybody who wants to, every meeting, I know it's not touching the phone. Hi, Chris.
Oh, he's still joining. So
Okay,
what
well,
about Rocky? There was Rocky on here.
Did I miss? Sam. Sam is there. Sam?
These three people too.
How about Seamus?
Hi there, Seamus Land, University of Montana as an adjunct.
Okay, Rocky?
Currently on mute, but
Rocky, hi.
Hey, Jerry, Audrey Alger, she says she has, her audio doesn't work, but she's a community member and employee at Missoula Public Health in the chat.
Super, thanks, Laura. Appreciate that. Who else? Did I miss anybody? If I've missed you, please chime in and let us know who you are.
Hi, I'm Rachel Parthasarthi. I'm with GSI Environmental.
Great. Hi. Anybody else? Sam, go ahead.
Oh, hi, Sam Carlson with the Clark Fork Coalition.
Hi, Sam. Okay, looks like we have everybody. So the CAG mission statement. We serve as a trusted liaison between the community, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Montana Department of Environmental Quality by becoming informed, sharing this information with the public, and engaging in the Superfund process to ensure the restoration of the former Smurfit stone mill site to a healthy ecological state for future generations. And we meet here monthly at 6 p.m. the first Monday or first Thursday of the month. So I'm going to start off and I'm going to just give you a brief history. I've been a Bridgetown resident now for 42 years. I'm a lifelong Montana resident, and I got involved back in when we started in March of 2017. At that time, I was part of the West Valley Community Council, which I have been for 16 years. Have one meeting left. Go. And anyway, we met for the first time in March of 2017. So according to my math, this is probably our 96th meeting. So we've been at this for a little bit. I'll just give you a little history. We are an independent group of community members representing a variety of stakeholder groups, and it's meant to promote the exchange of information among the EPA, the community, and the people that are involved in the cleanup of the site. So we've seen a lot of people over our 8 years, and of course we want more in the community to come and join us. This is about a 54-year history starting in 1955. I'm not going to go through this, but I do want to end here of the 54 years ending December 14th, 2009. It was a bad day for us here. It was a horrible, horrible, horrible day. Smurfit Stone announced that it's going to permanently close the site on December 31st. 417 jobs lost. These were jobs that in 2009 were paying upwards of $80,000 a year. Full benefits, big time, leisure time off. How do you make that up? A lot of those guys didn't have college educations. Their daddies worked at the mill. They worked at the mill, and we're going to lose a lot of people in our community, and we did. And it was a sad day for us. Horrible, horrible day. So we'll email this out if you want to see the history, but it is pretty interesting. But this is something that was bad for us here in our community. So go ahead. So we find out a couple years later that Smurfit Stone's going to be scrapped. Shuttered paper mill is going to get scrapped. We're not going to have jobs. So that, again, was some pretty sad news for us out here in Bridgetown. And there it's at. We didn't know. MLR was an affiliate of Ralston, and they made the announcement that the mill is in fact going to get drafted. So another bad day for us. So Governor Schweitzer says we're not going to let Smurfit Stone leave without cleaning it up. We're going to make them clean it up. So it's not going to be a Berkeley pit. This is a facility that will be completely cleaned up before Smurfit Stone Container leaves Montana. That's what our community was holding on to. That's what we heard. So we were hopeful at that point. So go ahead. So then former Mayor John Engen came out and said, great, thank you, Governor Schweitzer. We're happy to hear that you're going to stay committed to making sure that this gets cleaned up and maybe back to work. So we're a little bit tiny hopeful, but not a bunch. Bill Carey was a former Missoula County Commissioner. He says, we don't hold Smurfit to cleaning it up. That would be a complete environmental disaster. So we're very glad he came over. He cares about it deeply, obviously. So hopefully some good things will start to happen. So that was 14 years ago, March, 14 years ago. So then we find out that the mill site's clean, safe for development. Cool. So we again have a little bit of hope. We got a clean mill site. Let's go. Super good. So Dick King says, we're encouraged. We've got a plant that's going to come out. We're going to have, I think it's a fuel of some sort, but now we're going to, since all the issues have been cleaned up, we're going to move on and we're going to have jobs with our power generation facility that's coming 2011. Okay. So new life with the alternative fuels facility, because Green Investment Group says it bought this site for $20 million. So now we're excited again. Cool. So then we have our new owners come out, Ray Stillwell and Mark Spizo come out with the governor, and we're going to end up with 15, 20, 30 more businesses, maybe combining recycling and energy. And that's in 2011. So again, we're kind of excited out here. Cool. So they're going to work closely with the local communities to create jobs. And it's going to be energy technology and alternative fuels at the site in 2011. Right? Same thing, bought some time. We're going to have some more jobs. Same, great opportunity, professional. This is talking about M2 Green or Green Investment Group. So we're really excited that they're going to come out and restore the mill. All good. It's a good day. So we're feeling it out here. We're liking it. So then they say, well, now we're going to work with the EPA and it's cooperative. And as always, the health and safety of the citizens of Missoula County is our #1 priority. And that's September 13th, 2012. So we're still rolling through the years here. Well, then in 2015, we're going to have a small city. Then in 2020, the lender's going to foreclose and he's going to proceed with his own development out at the mill. So go ahead. Then in 2015, the EPA says, well, not clean. We're going to conduct a comprehensive investigation of soils, river sediments, ground and surface water to determine the nature and extent of contamination at the site. And they're going to reimburse EPA more than $600,000 for past costs incurred. This agreement helps us take the necessary steps to fully identify and begin to address threats to human health and the environment at the Smurfit Stone Mill site, said Sean McGrath, EPA's regional administrator in Denver. We're encouraged that sampling is scheduled to begin this month. So that was 10 years ago-ish. We've been through a lot of sampling. We've been through a lot of things with the PRP's companies helping on the mill. They're a stakeholder. They're part of it. In 2022, we had a visit from Casey Becker, and she called the EPA's study of the site problematic and said that the team needed to do more to build trust with the community. Following her visit, there was a commitment to do more sampling, and she wanted to make sure that the community and county commissioners and other interested parties are all comfortable with the work that the EPA is doing. And so one of the functions that the K does is that we're the voice of the community. And we take what the community hears and we bring it to the PRPs and we bring it to our stakeholders and our county commissioners and the EPA. And we act as that liaison to bring community concerns and hopefully get the site cleaned up, as our mission statement says, to a healthy ecological state for future generations. And we look at that also as economic viability. So that's kind of a brief history in a nutshell from 2009 until now. So PRPs are potentially responsible for parties. Okay. We throw out a lot of effort. Yeah, I just don't want you to slide through them. No, I wouldn't dare do that. So that's my part, and I will, any questions?
And the potentially responsible parties are International Paper, West Rock, and M2 Green. So those are three companies that bought pieces of bankrupt Smurfit Stone and are therefore held responsible according to the EPA. Although there could be more PRPs potentially.
And mentioned that Casey Becker was the regional administrator for this region of EPA.
She was regional aid administrator. We do have a new region aid administrator. He was just appointed by President Trump 2 weeks ago, Cyrus Western, a couple weeks ago. So we have a new one. We've been through 6-ish since starting, I think. We've been through a lot of regional administrators through our history so far of the KEG.
And just for the naive and new, obviously the original company isn't responsible for putting it up, and because I don't understand any of this, how did they get out of that?
So part of the reason that the mill went out of business is because they went through bankruptcy proceedings. And as a function of those bankruptcy proceedings, different parts of the company were sold to International Paper and West Rock.
Got it.
Yeah. And then M2 Green bought parts of this prior to being like let off the hook for it. Essentially, they bought it before parts of the super fund process began.
Mary, you had a question?
No, Bruce addressed my question.
Ken, you had one?
Yeah, during like the first part of the transitions and the sale, if the site was going to be a energy producing facility, would it have to have been cleaned up and researched for contamination? And what started the research of the contamination? Or could it have just continued, to be a different company and the contamination stays there?
So Ken, those are good questions. And I think we can talk about them more specifically after if you want. I think part of the point of them being in Jerry's presentation is that there's like a kind of roller coaster of hope and lack of hope, and something's going to happen and then something's not going to happen. And so that was kind of, I think, more of the point than necessarily the specifics of how a new development could go in there, because we had some people who wanted to, you know, do recycling and all sorts of things like that.
The CAG really relies on scientific people in the room, and I'm not one of them. I don't have a scientific background. I represent my community, and what happens to the future generations and with the economic feasibility of the site is really where the CAG comes in to just one piece of it. And so our job, working with all the stakeholders, is to bring those concerns of contamination, of what's happening, all of those things, to work together with the PRPs and EPA and other stakeholders. Anybody else? No?
I liked his question. So when was it the EPA that initiated that we're going to start looking at the contamination and testing? Who started that?
So there's a lot of back and forth associated with Smurfit and how it would go through the process. For a while. There's conversations around, well, if we don't go through the Superfund process, we can get it up and going and get industry back in here and kind of get the economy going again. And that did in some ways set back the attempts to investigate it with sampling and everything like that. There was a preliminary assessment done by a consulting company, URS, in 2011, and they had some great data and a good understanding of the site. The potentially responsible parties objected to a lot of that, though. And so the data that is currently being used by the potentially responsible parties didn't start until 2014.
Okay, thanks.
So with that, I would like to introduce Jen Harrington. She's part of the CAG administrative team, and she will talk about tribal council policy and practice. She's just the heroes. Okay.
Well, good evening, everyone. I was just asked to share about why have I been volunteering for the last 8 years for the community advisory group. So I grew up in Missoula. I actually, this is just a picture of the Clark Fork, beautiful Clark Fork River. So I grew up in Missoula on the north side, and you can see this early depiction of Missoula where there's a lot of development, lots of smoke coming up here, and so the north side's over here, and there's the white pine and sash mill. And so my young years in Missoula, there were instances in which the inversion was so bad you literally couldn't see across the street, and they would have us stay inside as kids, which I'm not sure how that kept us safe from the air. But so then they, you know, it seems like environmental law is always reactionary instead of protective, and so there were, you know, wood stoves and other things had to happen. But I think I've been so lucky to grow up here and have access to really healthy, natural places that I also become aware of when development causes some harm to these places. So that's kind of where one of the reasons why I'm here today. So this is just a picture of Horner, not Horner Waldo. This is White Pine and Sash over on the north side. Just things like I grew up blocks from here, and the pollution there are dioxins, PCPs, some really nasty things that were in the air. And there's some, well, they were methane beds, they were like log ponds, and there's currently a place of development on the north side right now. So I, when I was doing my master's work, I came out here to those initial groups, I think the EPA was coming out here to talk with the community about the site, but there wasn't a lot happening yet. And the CAG or the EPA had, I forget his name, there was a gentleman that came out and just started to talk with us about creating a community event. Robert Miller. And we started to learn about what a CAG was and the function of it, how to best represent the community and answer the questions the community has. Brian actually helped us develop the mission statement back in those early days. And at the same time, I was looking at for a master's project, and I just worked with the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes to understand, as a case study, how they were involved or not involved in not only Superfund, but because these are the Aboriginal territories of the tribes, they have rights to be part of any conversation. So realistically, they should have been part of the conversation of, should this mill be placed here on the river? And they were not. So in my research, I spent a lot of time in the Missoula or the U of M library archives. And Clancy Gordon was a professor at the University of Montana in the Environmental Studies program, and he was concerned about the mill and its impact on the environment. So these are some of the pictures I found. I think these little tiny kids, like 40,000 slides in the archives. But these were some of them that I found, and discoloration of the river. This was the berms shortly after they were made because of the fish kills, and that discoloration was something that he was worried about. And environmental policy again was kind of responding to that. And there wasn't yet anything that was going to protect the river from being impacted. And this is a picture of Clancy Gordon and a colleague looking at the foam discharge that was coming out of the Smurfit mill at the time. Or I guess it was probably Champion at the time. So this was a picture that I did use in my master's thesis. I think it was compiled by Peter Nielsen, just kind of showing the site. And it was a shocker to me to see this, to think about when we look at the landscape, perhaps we're not really seeing everything that's there. And what wasn't being seen was potential harm, current and future harm. I think this was also from Clancy Gordon, looking at historic river channels. And then Whitney and Spindler had done a nice paper, and they went out to the Clark Fork before the mill broke ground and found that there were at least 50% of the organisms there in the river that were sensitive, which means that they're intolerant to pollution. But what it also means is that the conditions were healthy before the mill broke ground to support that many sensitive organisms. But 7 months after the mill started operating, the sensitive organisms dropped down to 17% at the same station. So an immediate and significant impact that the mill had. And so that was just over an 8 month period or 7 month period, and the mill was in operation for many decades. Why I'm interested, the mill employed lots of my friends, my neighbors, their parents. And the same with the north side. And it's important, but it also, some of their health has been impacted. And my dad worked hard, and he wasn't in the mill work, he was automotive auto body painter, but he died because of exposure at work. And these are just things I think about when I'm here in these rooms. It's like, how can we prevent this harm? I think a lot about PCBs, because often we're given, in these meetings, we hear about acceptable cancer rates, like that 1 in 10,000 is an acceptable rate for our community. And to me, that's just unacceptable. And I don't understand, it doesn't sit well to me. For one, if we clean this space up to better than what that acceptable cancer rate is that the EPA has established, then we are, more protective than just protecting the people now, it's for future generations. And PCBs, it's not just a cancer risk, there are just a myriad of health risks associated with exposure to this particular contaminant. It's been incredible to be with the people that are committed to this site and making sure that the community are involved and that the site is clean. We sat here for many a meeting wanting the EPA to support more fish tissue study. And the tribes came forward and saying, hey, the past fish study was good, but not complete. It doesn't account for tribal subsistence fishers and the consumption of the entire fish. And the entire fish, the fatty tissue, is where a lot of those PCBs and other contaminants will not only reside, but bioaccumulate. They'll get larger. So eventually, with the help of Senator Tester and his team, they did get some more testing. And then after the results of that came back, the fish consumption warning went from, what was it, 102? It grew from 2013 to 2018 to a 140-mile stretch of the river. And that's an incredible impact to have, that our fish aren't healthy because of exposure, which means the operator exposed, means we're exposed. It's important, I guess, for me. I think about the web of things that are impacted by this contamination. Again, I would love to see more comprehensive studies of, like years ago, we had a mill worker's daughter come and talk to us about, she had been diagnosed with brain cancer. And some of her classmates had as well out here in Frenchtown. And she just wanted to know, is there any link with the site? But what we had found was that cancer cases are linked to where they are diagnosed, not necessarily where they were historically. So it's not necessarily a good indicator. So we had wanted, I think we worked with the Montana Department of Health to do a more comprehensive study, but then COVID happened. So it got derailed a little bit. But I think it would be good for the community to know just like what are the risks associated with waste in places, and if this risks continue to remain. Because they persist. PCBs don't break down. So, I have heard, I was at a chemistry lecture recently, and he had said, well, if you burn it at so many thousand degrees, it will break it down. But where would we do that? And because, if they were to move the PCB contamination up to the dump, which they have already when they did that emergency remediation, some of that was just physically moved. It didn't get remediated. The PCBs are still there, but they're just moved. And so what we were talking about, the conservation of energy, that how do we deal with something that we can't break down? And so it's just, and again, something to think about. This is just a picture. It was from my thesis about these are federally recognized reservations. There are 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States, but these are reservations. And then this is this was back in 2019. These were Superfund sites is listed, and then this is kind of how close often they are to reservations. But it's also just amazing to see how many there are on the landscape. It was funny that you had the chain, because this was on one of my slides in my thesis about, that headline in the Missoulian that it was safe and clean for development. And yet, but this was years ago. This was the gas protest, but the people were, I'm not, I don't think any of us want to hurt community. It's just about making sure we all understand what the risks are and what can we do to make sure that the least possible risk is left on the site. Again, just more of the sites, and it's concerning, to have this. Though there has been some sampling, there's not been any much of any remediation, or, I guess we're not there yet. We need more data. But that's just the short story here, about why I'm here and what questions I still, would like to have more information on, and just making sure that the community is represented in every step of the way. Thank you.
Thank you.
I know, it's great.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Elaine Adams. My background's in geology, and so I'm prone to thinking pretty far back in time and space, but I'm going to try and limit that. I'm also going to try and limit any technical words. So if you're in the crowd and I say an acronym, wave your hand and I'll fix it right away, okay? So I'm excited everyone's here. I'm excited for all the folks online. I think this is a time that is important for the community to come together, and therefore I'm just going to give a little bit of an update about where we were, where were we, where are we. It's going to be super smooth, but I think it's important when we come here to talk, particularly representing the community, that we think about our history and how that informs how we see the present, okay? And so what you're looking at here on this slide is, on the left is 1955. So you see an aerial photo of the site before it was developed at all. You see a bunch of old oxbow channels of the Clark Fork. You see it was moving around there. You see farm fields. Then on the right in 2011, you see just how much the site has changed, just how much is there, all the different colors, all the infrastructure, everything like that. So what happened from there, from 55 to 11, and where are we going from 2025 forward, okay? So background, timber industry, pretty big in Montana for good reason. In the 50s, there was a lot going on at Bonner and White Pine Sash. We've heard about some of those places, but there was also a lot of slash. There was a lot of limbs, a lot of smaller trees, a lot of things that weren't being used. And so the Chamber of Commerce was like, let's figure that out. Let's find something. Let's do something. And that something was a pulp mill. But in order to do a pulp mill, what you really need, because the process is heavily chemical, but also heavily in need of water, is you need to be very proximal to water. And so in searching around, they looked at a couple sites. Boom, look at that, right next to the Clark Fork River, lots of space, lots of people living close by, that type of thing. So began operation in 1955. Jen, we didn't even compare presentations, but we're leading into one another's presentations because we have had these conversations before. Shortly after the mill opened, there was a big fish kill downstream. And so what that meant was the community was upset, there was a lot of concern, and from there, changes had to be made. And that's kind of the story of Smurfit Stone throughout its history. It kind of kept updating to keep up with rules and regulations and things like that. But the big thing is, and you see it in this aerial photo from 64, is somebody went out with a D50, big equipment, and just started making ponds, kind of making them. And then, as the operation moved forward, or as those ponds got filled up, they started adding aeration or more technology, that kind of thing. But it wasn't all at once. And so that picture in 2011 wasn't necessarily representative of where things came to lie or what chemicals went where and that sort of thing. So that's important. As it moved forward and regulations kind of kept up, the there were discharge permits. So let's make sure we don't kill all the fish again. Let's kind of track some of that. And so the Montana DEQ started having a discharge permit with a bunch of different information. Some of it was associated about when they could put water in the stream, mostly when it was high. They say the solution to pollution is dilution sometimes. And that's the case here, because they could only do it when it was high enough that they deemed it safe. But there was also an acknowledged large portion of seepage from those ponds into the groundwater, into the river. And that's reflected in this permit here. There was also that acknowledged understanding of, hey, we've seen this. We've seen sensitive species. We've seen issues. And so we're going to ask you as a part of this permit to do in-stream invertebrate surveys. We're also going to ask you to analyze sediment and fish for dioxin. That's a chemical that's pretty toxic and can bioaccumulate. It's one of the toxins and contaminants that we'll talk about. What's important to know is that it was known early on. It was included in this discharge permit in 1995. Okay, so that was 30 years before now. So acknowledge. Okay. While the mill operated, they also went out and started experimenting with things like, can we recycle plastics? Can we do some of these other things? And so you'll see a lot of variability in a lot of the dumps and things like that. Here you'll see a barrel, just trying to give you the picture that it's not all homogeneous, that it's not all the same, that everything wasn't just laid down like sand on a beach, All right, so that kind of brings us to, something that Jerry really hit home was the mill closed, okay? And that had a big impact on our local economy, on a lot of families and folks. But I'm not going to talk about that. Jerry did. So I'm going to talk about what we knew at that point in time that the mill closed. So when the mill closed, permits acknowledged that there was seepage of water from the ponds into shallow groundwater and ultimately to the Clark Fork River. That was included in a lot of DEQ documents. That the mill is likely contributing dioxins to the Clark Fork River. That's why they had to sample it. They were looking for them in sediments and fish. The mill caused fish kills in the past. That was a lot of the rationale for limiting discharge, putting in ponds, a lot of the infrastructure. The use of the water created a big cone of depression, big straw, sucking all that water down. And at the same time, because it used it all in the pulping process, and it also wanted to recover all of those chemicals out of the water so it could reuse them, it stored a lot on site. So it was sucking down a lot of water and mounding up a bunch of water elsewhere. So complex groundwater. That's why they did a bunch of studies on site to kind of understand what was going on and what that was doing in terms of the river and how they could stay in line with their permits. Employees also reported areas of dumped barrels, spills, emergency spills, incidents in different areas where, people had to rinse off immediately and throw their clothes away and things like that. So lots of chemicals, spills, as you would assume in a big industrial site like this. Also, there were a number of dumps and or landfills, depending upon how you want to call them, but there were a number of places where folks would just come with their stuff from home too. And in the 90s, new rules came into play. So a lot of those were shut down because there was no way in which they could put a liner under them and collect the water that was running through them and make sure that they weren't contaminating groundwater and things like that. So they were closed, often, with wood chips or some local soil placed on top of it. And then the berms, there's a history of permits associated with those berms that really just showed they needed ongoing maintenance. There were issues every other year, pretty much. Lots of rock, lots of, let's go out there and make sure that doesn't crack open. And that was associated not just with the overtopping or water coming up and over the berms, but just a function of the fact that somebody went out and pushed all this river rock up into a berm. These aren't engineered or anything. And so, those are just facts that were well understood at the point in time at which the mill closed. So Jerry went through a little bit of some of those interim steps where we thought maybe some company would come in and just jump right to it, but I'm jumping to the point where we enter Superfund. So this is the Superfund snake. It's how you move through the Superfund process and the different steps. And it involves a lot of different acronyms that often are shortened into, you know, things that are hard to track. But essentially it's like, we're gonna check it out. We're gonna decide if it's listed or not. The companies who the EPA were like, you're responsible, said, okay, we're responsible. We're signing this administrative order on consent. And so they did that and then moved into this remedial investigation phase. And that's where we still are right now, okay? And that's where you're supposed to summarize what's going on the site, like what's the state, how are contaminants located, where are they moving, that kind of thing. And right now, this is a key time for the community because we're turning the corner on the snake. We're turning the corner. The EPA says we're done with this and we're moving into the feasibility study. And so now I'm going to outline kind of how we've stepped forward with that and what it means without as many acronyms as possible. Brian.
Just to get one more person just jumped on.
See, Brian, this is why you're supposed to be here. Brian Barkowiak. Okay. Anyway, great. So, anyway, the other key point over here is the record of decision. That's when it's like, we are writing out our decision about how this will be cleaned up. The potentially responsible parties are responsible for this, and then we're done, okay? And so going from here to here, pretty crucial time period because that dictates what the outcome's gonna be and then how you'll get to, you know, following through that plan. All right, big graph, don't worry about it. Key thing right here is like, is it contaminated? Is it protective of human health? Something that's really important when it comes to the EPA, it's all risk-based. Does leaving this here result in a bigger risk to human health, death, cancer, that kind of thing? And where we have a lot to say is these, where it's like, are the alternatives in the feasibility study. So you turn the corner and they're like, no alternative. Second alternative, let's leave everything in place and just monitor it. Third alternative, let's move one thing over here and monitor it. You know, they kind of outline that. So are those options compatible with local rules and regulations, and mostly state rules and regulations, okay? And then the other one over here, which is why we're all here tonight and why I encourage everyone to continue to show up to this, is this one right here, is will the community accept the solution? Another diagram, let me walk you through it. This one's crucial, okay? So sampling, why are we sampling? Who really cares? Let's get this sucker cleaned up, right? Maybe. All right, this is kind of how we walk through it, but let's walk through it backwards because that makes more sense, okay? Receptors, who are receptors? You, me, birds, people who are fishing, tribal fishers, people who are camping, the people who might work there, the people who might live there. Some of the receptors and other cleanup sites I've been on, they've gone so far as to talk about, are there going to be gardens here? Are there going to be those types of things? So you kind of have to figure out what's going to happen to it and how are the contaminants on site going to increase the risk for them. Then you walk back from there and it's exposure pathways. So where are the contaminants going? How do they get to these receptors? And that's kind of more fate and transport. So you have a landfill, you have a dump, it has some barrels in it. Are they leaking? Are they not? Is it going through the groundwater? Are you accessing it? Or is it causing risk to you because you're an industrial worker and you're cleaning it up or not? Are you a kid? You know, those kinds of things. And then contaminant source, do we know where the contaminants are? You know, this was 1955 to 2009, 2010. That's a lot of years with a lot of changes. Whole site's 3,200 acres, industrial core, 100 acres or so, wastewater areas, 900 acres. That's a lot of space, okay? And then Jen kind of referenced this earlier, but there's regular toxic risks and then there's cancer risks. EPA has a different standard. One of those rules and regulations that we hope the EPA understands is important to Montana is DEQ accepts 1 in 100,000 additional deaths as a function of cancer at at a site as compared to 1 in 10,000. So you want that number, you want to be sure that you're accepting fewer. All right. Okay. So these are the hypothetical future users. This is complicated. Stay with me though, because this is how the other stuff makes sense. So these are the receptors. I went through some of them. These are the pathways. Okay. Not super important. Just we'll come back to this. Okay. All right. So the new consultants get started in 2014 and they go through and they're like, we're going to do some grids. We're going to do some random sampling across the site. Some of these grids will be like 40 acres. Some of them will be like 100 acres. And we'll grab little bits of samples here or there and see if it's contaminated or not. Okay.
I like the thing where you said, look at the football field at the university.
Bunny, you're cutting to the chase, my friend. This is how often we've seen the same slides, everyone, okay? Bunny's gonna ruin the lead, okay? Anyway, in a perfect intro by Bunny, I would like to draw your attention to this red outline of a dump, So it's right there. There's a lot of dots on maps, but it's important when we think about scale, okay? This is that same red area over something that you might come to recognize a little more, okay? And so when we look at that and we kind of scale all of the samples to something that like we recognize more, you just see how limited those are, okay? Like imagine that's your phone. That's gonna be pretty hard to find if that's your dot or your kid even, that's my problem always. Anyway, so scale, huge. Samples, some, but this is a huge site, okay? And throughout this process, we're the community, the KEG, the trustees, everybody's trying to kind of like participate and be like, well, this is what we're concerned about. And so early on, it was clear that we weren't really considering that groundwater on the site and this EPA understanding of the site, or PRP understanding of the site. Water moving to the river and identifying that as a pathway wasn't really considered. And so we worked with a bunch of...
Elena, don't say that. That's not true at all.
Okay.
We know water moves from the east side of the site to the west side of the site.
Okay, so the PRPs are here, and they're often talking with the EPA a lot. So those meetings aren't open to the public. And so what we're going to do here is going to continue this presentation. Dave says that's not true, and that's fine. I wasn't able to find it in a lot of the documents that came out, and that's maybe going to be a recurring theme, is because we have a lot of questions that remain that we've asked of the EPA and the potentially responsible parties. We welcome the potentially responsible parties to work with us to clean this site. That's something that's been hugely successful on other cleanup sites in the area. When that happens, we can move forward much quicker. But that hasn't necessarily happened. I'm glad that the consultant's here tonight. All right, so anyways, we wanted to bring some other resources to the table to ensure that samples in the river and consideration of the backbone of our community and in large parts our new economy is intact and understood and fully considered in this EPA study. And so we used isotopic radon. We did some things with a fiber optic cable just to help show where it would really be helpful to sample and to see whether or not contamination from the site was causing a do not consume fish advisory, or really help the community either feel safer or highlight and pinpoint where contaminants would come to lie in the context of that exposure pathway. This is just another study we had, folks at the university do. So just trying to show that we aren't just picking out issues, but we're trying to bring solutions to the table. We're trying to bring data to the table. We're trying to bring concerns of the community forward in a scientific way. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily the way that the EPA operates. Data needs to be done under their just it has to be signed off on by the EPA for that data to count. We were still very hopeful that that would occur. So regardless of those studies and the fact that they weren't really included, we continued to participate in the way that that the EPA preferred, which is writing a number of letters. So we have tons of letters, and that's what this slide is showing. These are just from Missoula County, but there's some from the CAG and the tribes and the trustees and the number of folks. Anyway, so where we got was in after the work was done there, what came out the other end when the risk assessments came forward is that this is where the risk was using that sampling that the potentially responsible parties did. They said, hey, you know what? We sampled some things. We think, groundwater is drinking water, maybe some surface soil and groundwater as drinking water is the concern here. And then fish down here. But, but it's important that there needs to be a pathway there too. So this is kind of concerning because at this point in time, there were also conversations around potentially the new property owner developing the site to have 8,000 people out there. That's Hamilton. That's a small city. And so what that means is that, there was a lot of soil, there were a lot of things that the community was concerned about and that wanted to be sure that didn't fall on future residents, the risk, the concerns around health and all of that, but that instead the folks who caused contamination and profited, made money off of that industry, cleaned it up. And so it was at this time that the community really continued to bring forward a lot of the points that we had from the original slide, like the things we know to be true after the mill site closed. This is that same list. So we were still concerned about the seepage of water from ponds into shallow groundwater and ultimately to the Clark Fork. Still concerned about dioxins, but also furans and coplanar PCBs. Still concerned about the water and where the employees had said barrels had been deposited and put in the landfills, all of that. Still concerned about the dumps that were closed so they didn't have to be brought up to standard. Not that that wasn't something that happened in a number of different places, but just that with this opportunity to clean up the site and restore it with the potentially responsible parties who put it there, these are key issues, and the berms as well. And so working with the commissioners, working with the community, working with the partners in the room here, we tried to bring the lessons to bear that we'd learned from previous and other cleanup sites in the area, like Stimson, like White Pine Stash in Milltown. And so what's really concerning here is given that dynamic, that receptors and pathways, it seemed pretty clear that the path was moving towards leaving things in place. And what's concerning is that's what had happened in Deer Lodge at Arrowstone Park with some of the contamination there. It got turned into a park, but then that park was shortly thereafter closed because kids were playing in contaminants that had risen to the surface. Those were slickens. And so, particularly if we think about the potential of having some of this property or, be dedicated to a park for Frenchtown or just have that many people on it, waste in place is a concern. And so the commissioners met with EPA and started talking about the concerns at hand. The Casey Becker also met with the community and some of the trustees. And out of that was a request, a bunch of things kept coming up, all those things. And so what the request was like, can you put this in, can you simplify it? Can you kind of summarize it all? And so we paid a consultant because we started going through and it started getting too long, but we hired somebody to kind of consolidate our letters, that list of letters that we put together and those of others into a memo to kind of highlight the different pieces that we still had a lot of concerns around. And these are the 5 headings in that document. And those were sludge, wastewater, groundwater, biota, and the Clark Fork. So that happened in response to Casey Becker. At that point in time, we continued the commissioners continued to work with Casey Becker regarding this memo, and luckily that request came forward and was committed to. There was a commitment to, you know, sampling that we requested prior to finalizing the remedial investigation report. We're looking at how to best move forward with additional sampling expeditiously, but expect that it will delay issuance of the report. The technical team will reach out, etc. So this was a huge win. This was great. This was very exciting. And we really hoped that it would then mean that we could move forward quickly. So then we got to work. And what that work looked like was a series of meetings, some more documents, and a lot of things like that. But out of that came requests. And those requests for sludge, which, you know, you can see here is that there was a density of 1 new soil boring for every 3 acres, and then multiple discrete. So this is a picture of those borings, what they came across. There was like odors in some and things like that. So like, let's sample that was the request. And then that 2 of these borings be finished as groundwater monitoring wells. So you already got the geoprobe out there. You got the thing. Like, let's put a pipe in it, see what's going on with the water. And then that these findings should further inform other plans, because that fate and transport piece is key. So this is the sampling. We're kind of zoomed in, still quite big. Anyway, quite big. But these are and here I'm going to caveat too, because we don't have really any data back from this. This was what was in the work plan. So this is what they said would happen. And sometimes things can change a little bit on the ground, but this is where we think we have sludge borings. And this is a slightly different area. Someone messed up that one. There we go. Anyway, those are those borings. So just showing you kind of where they are, but then also, you know, how they fit into the other dots on the map. This is tons of charts, guys, lots of tables. If you want to get into it, I'm happy to, but probably after. Anyway, just kind of taking a look at density. So we did get a lot more dense. That's great. There's some that there aren't as dense, but we got more density with that sludge. And that's important because the sludge came out of the bleaching plant for a good portion of the time. And that's where the dioxins came from. So we really want to kind of narrow in on that. Still looking for those 2 spoils basins, I guess.
Those are done.
Okay, we don't have any data from that yet, though, but thank you. Yeah, I don't have any data. So anyway, but this is what we think happened. As David said, we don't have the data yet, but we think there's more density. We think maybe there's discrete samples in each boring, but we're not sure. It'd be good to know. We don't think the borings were finished in groundwater, unfortunately, and we're not sure about that. So just kind of trying to bring folks up to speed. We've been talking about this since 2022. And so, you know, it being 2025, this is a review for folks or getting them up to speed. So other things to consider, leaching the groundwater. We want to learn more about that. Like we said, the dioxins and furans are in here because we're concerned about industry. They're just looking 10 feet deep often. The caps and liners aren't clay. So it's, you know, we can call them a cap, but really, if you're not clay, then you let water in. You know, and if you go out there, you can still see that there's not really vegetative growth. Slickens and aerostone. And then just the consideration, some of what we learned from other areas is like waste in place at the Bonner Mill, as that grew and worked successfully with the county and the economy and everything, needed to remove and take one of those in place you know, repositories and move it because it was getting in the way of what the ultimate good use of that site. All right, so that was sludge. Wastewater, this was important because, you know, wastewater kind of slowly evolved. Like when we said it was originally just straight to the river and then things kind of came up, but there were a bunch of ditches out here. Water is moving all over. And so when there were spills in the plant, like, where did those go? We have some, and then there's like you know, at the end, there was a clarifier and there were some more wastewater treatment-y type things, but there were also just like a lot of ditches for emergency spills and everything like that. You wanted to get that stuff out of there. So let's test those, was what we're saying. And then a sample for every 2 acres by wastewater pond. So just trying to make sure, given how big the site is, that the density is enough that we're really capturing it. And then 2 subsurface samples per pond, you know, like one big spill at one time might not show up right on the surface, but it could still be going to groundwater. So, and then this is just a nice chemical bringing you back to hopefully some scary classes or not, I don't know, but just showing like some things that are called PCBs act more like dioxins and furans. So when we think about cancer, it's important to kind of get the whole mix that's going to hit your body in a way that will cause those harmful effects. And so we wanted sampling for that too, not just. So anyways, these were some of the maps we put together, just highlighting like the transformer station and a place that an employee said there was a lot of PCBs dumped, and the clarifier that would probably take out a lot of those. So anyways, we put together a map of where we thought would be great. But I don't really know, these things kind of got moved into different work plans, and things kind of just changed a lot since the commitment. So I really have no idea what's going on here. Hopefully we will someday. Groundwater was another big concern, and that's just because on this site we knew groundwater was huge. Whole reason the mill was here, huge. Pull out tons of water. So we were asking for more wells, and quarterly sampling on all the wells. We live in, you all know the seasons, we live in a snow melt hydrograph. So that river comes off pretty fast and big, and then it decreases. Well, here we also have the Frenchtown irrigation ditch that shoves a bunch of water in kind of in the fall. So pretty dynamic, and we knew when it was operating, it was really dynamic. This is one of the studies they did where they were trying to figure what direction and how fast water on site was going while it was operating. Every way. Anyway, here's another graph where it just kind of shows, this is like groundwater elevation, depth in feet. And so here there was a strike. And so water bumped up like 10.5 feet here when they weren't operating. So it just shows you how much they were pulling water down, how much it changed, how much dynamic it was in feet, you know, so that's considerable. And then this is another like water level in the ground, but this is over on Lacasse Lane. So when the mill stopped operating, you can see it just popped right up. And this is where the sampling has been done right now by the potentially responsible parties. So just really dynamic.
The sampling, those little blue dots were where they sampled?
No. Well, no. I should make it a line. It's not. It's just showing you the time period.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah.
At water level, but not at the low.
Right.
Yeah, I can work on this I'll work on this figure for you, buddy. I'll get it right next time. Anyway, so the water quality district does sampling across all of the Missoula aquifer. And so when we talk about background or when we talk about available data, my mind just goes right to all of the data that we collect every year across like 48 wells. It's very exciting, and we'd love to talk with you about it more. But when it comes to this, in some of the sampling, there were just comparisons with like groundwater in U.S. glacial aquifer areas. And so I just wanted to bring that, like, compared to the Missoula specific aquifer right here locally, the values for arsenic and manganese are on, and these are the median, the average, I should be specific, it's the middle, is 7 times as high for arsenic and 17 times as high for manganese. So just very different. And that's all of them, you know, these are averages, or that's the mean compared to the mean. Just really different. Anyway, so these on the left are the wells. We got together and put a map. We put dots on a map about where we wanted and we're hoping wells would be. And these gold glitter circles are where there were wells that were installed. And so we are glad that there were wells installed. It's not 100% clear the full process as to how we went from there to there. This is another hard table, but I love tables, and so I could not. But what we have here is like all the wells on site, and the little X's are when they're sampled. And so we asked for quarterly sampling, and right here, just cutting to the newer wells, because those are the ones we don't have a lot of data on. We have fall 2023, and then quarter 2 2024, quarter 3 2024, and some of these weren't installed until here, but this is quarter 3 2024. So you can see there's a lot of, some wells were sampled in some time periods and some weren't.
There's a fourth column that's missing in here.
Well, it depends on which table I got it from because we don't have all the data. So I know that there were 2 events where more wells were sampled, and then there were 2 other times where there was a smaller subset. So there were 11 wells sampled during whatever time period that you installed the wells that were for that transect.
I think the community should be aware that there were 4 work plans written. All 4 of those are online, have been available. Time they were assigned by the EPA well before the work was conducted, and those are available for your review. And any deviations to the work plans are very limited and documented.
So I'm happy to talk to that later, but right now I want to just get through the rest of this and have a really community focused one. The 4 today I went through all of the documents on the EPA website, and I have a list of documents that aren't on the website. So maybe we can talk about that, or I'll send that to the EPA later because I spent all day looking for things on that website. All right. So there were 9 new wells, or some of them were very concentrated. So I don't really know how to count that, but anyways.
Quick question. When we get to the community discussion, could we give him the opportunity to go online and point us to those findings? Is that something we could do in the community discussion?
I mean,
he can prove that they're there and that we can find them. Is that possible?
I don't care.
Okay, great. It's my community. I bet we can. Keep going.
All right. And so, then what was left over was some sediment and biota. And so there aren't really plans, as far as I know, to really do a lot with that, but there were some sediment samples. And so if you look at the site here, there were a bunch upstream and then a bunch along the site and then 1 downstream. So that's what happened with sediment. So since the commitment to do additional sampling, we had multiple meetings, tons of time put into building those maps and putting those documents together. And so it changed from, getting the APT document to a requirement for putting together data quality objectives. Those were long sheets. We did that. We had multiple meetings in Helena where we gave presentations providing our rationale. Some of those ended up in expedited work plans where, because they were moving forward so quickly, they started sampling, and that's when we got the maps of where they were hoping to sample. So just outlining that, because that's how it happened. So after that point, then monthly meetings were supposed to take place through the Frenchtown Technical Working Group. And the name changed a little bit, and then a facilitator came in, and it wasn't really certain. It was supposed to be a feedback of information, but a lot of those minutes were summarized in ways that weren't necessarily reflective of the concerns that the community had. I think they were a great reflection of the EPA's perspective in those meetings. So that's something that's important. The sampling on the river was biased toward upstream, and I'd say that we're more concerned about what's going on downstream, just given the extent of contamination and trying to figure out what's coming off the site or on the site. And then right now, almost none of the data is available for review. So David's coming in with some things because he has the data. I don't have the data. This is what I have, okay? And so then, we're also uncertain whether the data collected reflects the work plan. And interpreted data was also presented to folks to get the Frenchtown Community newsletter before it came to this group, which was supposed to be the group for the feedback of that information. And so that makes it hard for a technical working group or a working group to provide feedback or talk about like what we see in that data and what we're bringing to the table in our concerns and whether or not that's reflected, you know. And so what is good is that, you know, now there is more of a thorough connection of groundwater to the Clark Fork River. Those older channels that we saw in the early pictures that started the presentation are considered to move contaminants differently, which is something we've been talking about for a while. Co-cleaner PCBs were tested directly. So previously there was like an analog, and now they were really actually tested themselves. And then, you know, like it's hard to say. A lot of some sampling occurred. I don't know. We don't have the information as to how much. So that's kind of the state of where I know us to be participating really heavily in this process. And at the same time, the EPA also stated that they're moving from that understanding of where the contaminants are and how they move into the feasibility study. So how we're going to get them cleaned up and everything like that. And so bringing us back to the way that the EPA thinks about things with contaminants and bait and transport and exposures and receptors. These are just bringing some of those questions that we still have to the fore underneath those boxes that the EPA thinks in. So, you know, concern around the 8,000 people, biota, that's all the animals. The Clark Fork River is really important. You know, new wells, some of the newer wells have higher metals than some of the older wells, and it's unclear why that is. Progress reports from the PRP state there are anomalous results, but you know, how are they anomalous? It'd be interesting to know if it's a function of an anomaly or a pathway. Bait and transport. We do know that there's arsenic and manganese, like I pointed out, a lot higher than the rest of the aquifer. But then there's pop-ups of dioxins and furans and coplanar PCBs. How are they getting there? We don't have plume maps. And so, you know, it's also hard. Upstream testing is pretty clearly trying to prove that it's coming from the background. But what we were hoping to see was more testing of downstream to see where things were going, because that could tie more directly to the site. And then really we're hoping for that quarterly sampling, complex groundwater sites. So, and then dumps, landfills, interaction with groundwater, drum spills, you know, it was a lot of things that have been discussed frequently at these meetings. So as we turn the corner in the Superfund Snake to the feasibility study, there will be more talk around a lot of specifics. And we've heard from folks at the EPA that just because we didn't address your current concern here doesn't mean we can't address it in the feasibility study. But everything in the EPA is driven by risk. And once we turn the corner, then it's pretty hard to put any new information back into those risk assessments. And those kind of drive what's the priority for where cleanup happens and how it happens. And like I said, our big concern is waste in place. We've learned from other Superfund sites, and we've learned from what we have to do as a community to remedy them after the fact, after the potentially responsible parties are gone. And so, you know, oftentimes there is more sampling, but oftentimes that's like, oh, we're going to scrape up the spots we found with the contaminants, and then we're going to confirm there aren't any in the side of that hole. And that's just inherently different. And then just because I mentioned it, I thought, you know, it's important too. This was the Frenchtown Community newsletter. It comes out online. It also goes to everybody in the community. And it said that the remedial investigation has identified unacceptable levels of arsenic and manganese contamination in the shallow aquifer directly below the site. The shallow water is not a drinking water source. And then it said dioxins, furans have also been identified in 4 localized areas associated with the former wastewater treatment system. And so what I see between the parentheses of it not being a drinking water site is it crosses off that receptor, you know, so it crosses off one of those few ways that receptors saw more risk on the site. And then that means that that's less likely to lead to cleanup. If there isn't risk, there isn't usually cleanup. And then dioxins and furans have been identified in 4 localized areas associated with the former wastewater treatment plant. That was news to me. I don't know if that's water. I don't know if it's soil. I don't know which sampling plant it came from. I don't know if it's next to one of the places we identified as a concern, or where there were spills or anything like that. And so this is concerning to me, because we've been concerned all along about having the process just drive us straight to waste in place. And this information certainly got out in front of the work group reviewing it or seeing it, or any of the data actually even being released or data qualified to get on the website. These are my kids. I hope they live here when they grow up. And I hope that Smurfit is cleaned up enough that I feel comfortable having them live here. They love to float through where Milltown Dam used to be and have me tell them the story of the Milltown Dam. And I think that's really important for us to think about right now as a community, about what we can hope for, what we can come together to fight for, what we want to see, and just how important that could be, and what that could do for the next generation and the folks who live in this community. So, thank you. IT.
Me?
Yeah. Do you want me to hit the button, or do you want to hit the button?
I'll do it.
Okay.
So, thanks. I am gonna kind of review the past flooding events in the Clark River, and also talk about some of my concerns that I think, if they haven't been addressed, should be addressed. And I've asked Nick Gerhardt, who was a former colleague of mine in the Forest Service, and also one of the smartest people I know, to kind of help me with this. So Nick, chime in when I say something stupid. So, this is an older picture of the Smurfit site, and it just kind of shows the chaos we've been talking about. There's a lot of things that happened over time that happened in a lot of places. And just for background, you'll hear about operational unit OU1, 2, and 3. OU2 is this industrial area here, and then OU3 is this larger active pond area, et cetera, dumps. And so just for background, that's kind of how this lays out. And OU1 is the kind of surrounding ag lands that aren't as much of a concern. Okay? Oops. Okay, so the primary source is contamination. There's just a lot of things happen. I won't read all of this to you, but this comes out of one of the documents from Newfields, one of the consulting organizations that worked on this. And I added that there's been a number of spills. PCBs were used in the generators and transformers, and there's been documented spills of those oils. And at least one spot has been cleaned up in the past. So there's just a lot of things that happened over the time, and a lot of it wasn't very well documented. So these are the questions that I think we need to make sure they're addressed in this remedial investigation. Because after you do the remedial investigation, you move into the feasibility study where you're looking at ways to fix things. So we just want to make sure we understand at the remedial investigation stage clearly what we need, what the hazards, what the risks are. So we've talked about this. Where are the areas of contamination concern? And come on, how much is in these areas? And do we have enough soil sampling to identify those areas? And what's the chance of a large enough flood reaching the berms and perhaps making a new channel right through the middle of many of the ponds that were there historically? So here's a a diagram of all the peak flows from 1930 to on this diagram, almost to the present, through 2020. The two highest flows, 96 flood flow, and then our 2018 flood that we experienced here. In both of those cases, there was maintenance that needed to be done on the berms. Okay. One was I think this was about 55,000 cubic feet per second and about 53,000 cubic feet per second, just for reference.
Hey Bruce, and for those who don't know, I think you're talking about the Clark Fork River berm, which is 4 miles long along the Clark Fork River.
Correct.
Okay.
And there are also intermediate berms that for each pond had its own berm, which went around it. So if you look at USGS put together a potential flood flow for the Clark Fork River in 1908, and this is above Missoula, where this estimate is, and it's roughly 48,000 CFS above Missoula. And then if you go on, Bitterroot River in 1898 or 9, they've also put together a historic flood flow here in the Bitterroot, just above Missoula, where the Bitterroot comes into the Clark Fork, of about, 39,000 CFS. Okay. So there's been some potentially really high flows. These weren't synchronized together. They were different years. So if you add them together, they come out to about 86,300 cubic feet per second. So that's a lot of water. So these are the estimated flood flows for the 10, 50, 100, and 500 year flood flow. And so you can see that the highest flows that we've experienced since in 1930 are someplace in between this 47,000 CFS and the 60,000 in the 50-year flood. You know, just so you know, we haven't experienced anything even approaching the 50 year, or actually has approached the 50 year, but not beyond it. But I point out that if you do the numbers on it over a 50-year time period, you have about a 63% chance that a 50-year flood would happen. So we got to be planning this in long time frame consideration. It's not just, you know, whatever we do here has got to last the test of time. That's what I'm trying to say. And so then you go into 100-year, 73,900 CFS, and that has a 39% chance of happening over 50 years. And then the 500-year event, this was done by, it's a FEMA report, a different report from the Pioneer Technical Services. It's a DNRC and FEMA, or a FEMA estimate of the 500-year was 82,000 CFS for the 500-year, which is about what the Clark Fork and Bitterroot floods added together would have been. So, and that has almost a 10% chance of happening in a 50-year period. So, I would argue that anything above a 50-year or above it'd be a pretty good chance that berm would be in trouble. Okay. So here we go. This is the flood stages for those floods. And these two are the two floods that we've witnessed since 1930, these two blue circles. The flood stage is about 11 feet. These two floods are 12 and maybe almost 12 and a half feet of flood stage. So that's what we've seen. But if you go, here's 10 years, here's 50 years, here's 100 years, and here's the 500 year. By the time you get out to the 100 year, you're 1, 2, 3, 4, about 3.5 feet above anything that, in terms of depth of water, that this berm has ever experienced. And I just would tell you that the velocity of the flow and the turbulence that happens with increasing depth is enormous. And you'll figure there'd be huge standing waves and all kinds of things happening in that kind of an event. It would definitely work on this berm. Does that make sense? The yellow line is considered bank full. The orange line is considered the flood stage. Okay. So after our 2018 flood, we canoed down or rafted down the river, and we came across this island that had all this sand deposit, and then overlaying the sand deposit was this brand new deposit of golf ball to grapefruit sized cobbles. And it's about, you can't tell here, but it's almost 3 feet deep. And that was the result of that flood that really wasn't a huge magnitude flood, the 2018 flood. So you have I just put that in there to demonstrate the energy that you have in these high flows. So we've seen this slide before. It shows all the old historic meanders. That little island that had the deposits is right in here. And so it doesn't take a leap of imagination to think that you can see that a large part of the Smurfit stone development was in a former floodplain. It just was. It's obvious from satellite photos, even recent satellite photos. So next slide shows what I could speculate would happen. Say the breach was on this meander bend, where you're hitting the berm at almost a 90-degree angle in a flood event, and it breaches right here. The first thing it's going to do is fill in that first pond area until it breaches. And it could breach here and just flow back out to the river in a meander, or it could breach into another pond. You don't know. It's all because the secondary berms are no stronger than the primary berm. And so you get one berm flooding into the next, and it's conceivable that you would have a new channel that comes right through a number of these old ponds. I'm just saying it's conceivable. It's something like this happened in the flood a few years back in Oregon State, where a bermed area failed and filled up and failed again at the lower end of the berm. So this kind of thing does happen, and it's logical that it would happen. So that's kind of my concern, that we haven't addressed the potential. That's why I want to know what's here in all these ponded areas, because they could be eroded. In a worst case scenario, everything that's there could be washed into the Clarkport. And so it's a real concern. It's all hypothetical. I'm not a very good artist, so please excuse that. And so the questions I have are, it's unlikely that we're going to deal with climate change in any kind of timely manner. So I think these unprecedented weather events are likely to continue happening, maybe with increased frequency. It just seems to be what is it's just almost a guarantee, in my opinion. Because of the higher probability historic measurements, what we estimate flood flows based on past records. Well, if things are changing climatically, the past records may not be that accurate a way of predicting future events. And so that's another great unknown. And that Yellowstone event a couple of years ago, that it showed that these atmospheric river events can happen in interior Rocky Mountains. I mean, it did happen. Nobody ever expected a 500 to 1,000 year runoff event. And it was just, it was unbelievable that it happened, actually. It was a rain on snow event, late May, early June, and right when the snowpacks are primed to melt, they're all ready to go. And that's what happened to Yellowstone. So I just argue that it makes sense to recognize that these risks are there, and that we do as good as we can in addressing them before they happen, not after. And that's my thought.
Thank you.
Nick didn't tell me I said anything stupid.
Bruce, are you familiar with the studies that have been done at the site for flood risk?
No, I read the berm study that was done.
So there was an engineering analysis on the Clark Fork River berm that was done. That's a pretty sizable document. That evaluates all the potential risks that could cause flooding on the berm. And then there was, in 2018, there was a contingency plan developed by the EPA. And that was recently updated, and that's also.
Yeah, I'd like to see.
Well, and we went over it in a couple meetings. There are some concerns over stability analysis too.
There's an overtopping analysis on an internal berm. The internal berm can sit anywhere from quarter mile to half a mile to a mile inward from the Clark Fork River berm. And then in all of the sludge ponds, landfills that were talked about earlier behind that inner berm, they're outside the 100-year floodplain.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So, we have a lot of members of the public here tonight. We've just shared a lot. I think there's a lot of opportunities, hopefully at the technical meetings, to talk about a lot of the specific technical details. I think we'd be interested right now in getting questions from the public, particularly those, you know, who live in Frenchtown or downstream, or those who haven't necessarily been to meetings before. Does anybody have? Yeah, Kelly.
I've been to a few of your meetings.
Well,
I've
yeah.
learned a ton. But I will say, it's just like school. The more I hear it, the more I start to understand it. So thank you. I actually want to thank all of you who presented tonight. This is a ridiculous amount of information. So thank you. And I do feel like you drilled it down and presented it in a way that the average human can understand it if all they do is teach cartwheels and run a small business. So thank you. Having said that, I don't know this gentleman. He probably was at meetings and I just don't remember. He did make a couple comments and he could elaborate a little bit more on the comments he made. I'd appreciate it because I like to hear all the sides.
Sure.
I'm not sure which comments I should elaborate on.
Well, just the two specific were you said there was missing components to her chart and they were available online. And I just wondered if you could point us in the direction of that.
Sure. All of the study plans that have been finalized by the EPA, and EPA is conducting oversight on all of the investigation at the site. All of those plans are available to the public online.
Okay, and
So
that
anything
link
that
is in our notes somewhere.
anything we've conducted, you can just Google Smurfit and EPA.
And it's there.
You'll find their site.
You know, it's a little buried, but we'll send links out to show because there's like what, 3,200 pages or it's a lot.
Yeah,
And I know
there's a lot of
we can send the links out.
Okay, and I don't remember who you are. I'm sorry.
I'm David. So I represent the PRP group for the renewal investigation.
Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Okay. And then just the last one, you said there were more studies that you just alluded to. And again, those are on.
Yeah, those are also online. And I mean, some of those are starting to get a bit dated. You know, more recently, RDG has done, her design group has done some work for the county. That's good work. And then also the county and others are remapping flood risk.
So from your perspective, as a person that we have to play nicely with, because hopefully we're working together, how does this look to you? And are there any samples from your perspective representing your clients?
Yeah, so all of these studies were designed to support risk assessment, right? And then once risk assessment is conducted, you can identify where the risks are and to what extent the human health or the ecosystem is exposed to that risk. And then you can start looking at ways to mitigate that risk. And that's, as Elena pointed out, that's where we are in the process. And from my perspective, we have collected enough data to support risk assessment. However, we did go on this a bit of a detour in 2022, as Elena pointed out, collected quite a bit more data, mostly in the year 2024. And so the risk assessments, which were originally released in 2020, and actually the conclusions Elena pointed out in the newsletter came from that 2020 risk assessment. They didn't come from data that you haven't seen yet. So anyway, some additional data has been collected since those risk assessments were done, and EPA is in the process of reviewing those data and then revising those risk assessments.
Okay, thank you. Are you a lawyer? Or what is your background?
I'm a chemist.
Yeah, so I mean, are you talking about what was presented in the Frenchtown, or are you talking about what was highlighted in the receptors?
I don't know where those came from, but the conclusions you presented in that newsletter on that last slide.
Yeah, they came from the Frenchtown newsletter. I don't know where they came from.
Right, that information was, you'll find that in those 2020 risk assessments, you'll find those conclusions there.
The newsletter.
I don't know what those 4 sites are. They're the ones that have already been dug out.
Yeah.
They were the
No.
emergency removals, or, I mean, we can talk about it
Yeah,
later, but Logan.
Hey, you had my name on a slide, so I wanted to put forward a question to the people there in person. If the results of our work about a year and a half ago were not maybe taken into account because of some limitations by the EPA's ability to use our data, I want to ask the community then if any of those findings were still important enough to redo underneath the EPA's supervision. I know that was this was about a year and a half ago. You might remember us presenting it there, but I was just wondering how the community has felt about that proceeding or afterwards.
Well, just reintroduce what that data was.
Yeah.
Actually did.
So the request was, can you just introduce what you did, Logan? Because it was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, sure. And I'll do it really quickly because I know there's probably a lot of good questions. But essentially, it was a graduate level class under Dr. Wilcox at and we were a group of hydrologists, geologists, and hydrochemists. And what we all did is tackle separate parts of the Smurfit data availability. I know David just brought up the 2020 risk assessment report, and that was actually what our project sort of used as a baseline, trying to answer some of those questions that remained in the report. And it felt like we did actually answer some of them, but there were some limitations. Like we didn't have a lot of geochemical analysis available publicly, and I don't think it's been done afterwards. So that's what the project was. And yeah, there's a lot of outcomes, but it's all online now. So I believe it can be shared with the group.
Certainly. I'll get a link out. Appreciate it. Or there was a question too.
I was just going to say that that's come up. We've had a lot of different studies that have been presented to the CAG, and you can jump in and correct me, but I believe that EPA can't use them unless EPA requested or supervised them. Is that accurate?
I don't know what EPA's response was to, receiving or not
Well, I
receiving.
think his question to us though is, do we want them to conduct the next step study?
Well, I can answer part of her question.
Okay.
One part is we do have to meet a certain standard of quality, and that's spelled out in the quality assurance project. And so some data may be restricted for qualitative purposes versus quantitative.
I think the community wants the information, and we as the CAG are always appreciative of those presentations. We've seen River Design Group's presentation, and I think it helps the community respond. So yes, Logan, thank you.
But I also am aware that the university used a lot of data that were presented as the draft remedial investigation. So it's the same data EPA was using for their risk assessments. And so I don't think there's any real question about the data that they use. There may be some questions about their interpretations.
Fair.
Questions in person or online?
I guess I have a question, and it's related to the article in the Frenchtown newsletter. Is the dispute in the newsletter, it appeared to minimize the risks, which hurts our cause with EPA uses risk assessment to determine how they move forward with the site. So was it inaccurate in the newsletter? I mean, where's the inaccuracy and where's the dispute, and how do we get to, an agreement or, a meeting of the minds so that we can move forward? I mean, the district gets source document where we would, trust.
Yeah.
But if we can't trust the source information, I mean, that's a whole different issue.
Yeah, I mean, so I would have hoped usually the EPA comes and DEQ comes and we talk about things. Those were those technical working groups that is where data is supposed to come. And that's fallen off because we received data from 2023, but no data from 2024. And so it's uncertain to me. I did not know that the shallow groundwater was considered not to be a drinking water source, because that was still the concept for, those receptors and those pathways. And there were certainly, the dairy, the farm next door had a shallow groundwater well. There are still many wells in the Missoula area that are, 35 feet. And so that was that. And then there was also information, I didn't know, I hadn't seen that same post before in the newsletter about how there were just 4 sites of dioxins and furans. And maybe it's just from previous data that maybe I have had access to or not. But my concern was it seemed to downplay the risk on the site. We're still waiting for this 2024 data that we pushed really hard to get because of the concerns of the community, because of what we want to see on site. Yeah. So I mean, clear communication. It's great that folks are actually here from the potentially responsible parties to hear the concerns, and that all of the rest of folks are as well. I mean, that's how we make it better. But there is no specific document that's gonna, I do have some documents that I hope we could put up on the EPA website that are missing. I will send this to the EPA. I think I look forward to having a conversation about 2024 data, but also, oh, hey, Brian. You're on.
Hi. Hi, sorry. Good meeting. I apologize for not being able to be in attendance tonight. I do have to just make one quick clarification. And I did not review the newsletter in detail, but I think there's a difference of whether the shallow groundwater is being currently used as a drinking water source or could be used as a drinking water source. From the Natural Resource Damages Program's perspective, we evaluate injuries to state resources, and shallow groundwater is a state resource, whether it's currently being used for drinking or not. So, sorry, just a small clarification, and thanks for a good meeting.
Thanks, Brian.
So there is a restrictive covenant filed with the county for the aquifer beneath the site right now that says you can't add any new wells. And it's been known for a long time that shallow aquifer has some degree of contamination from the former operations.
Yeah, but and it's filed with the clerk and recorder. It's not filed with Missoula County. So Missoula County doesn't enforce that. That's only enforceable between the private parties.
I have a question on that topic. Does that restriction apply to the deeper production wells?
In terms of adding new wells, it does. But existing wells can be used. Existing water supply wells could be used at the site. So the shallow aquifer is being looked at less as a receptor and more as a potential source in the system. And that's the way EPA is evaluating risk at the site. So yeah, it has arsenic in it, it has manganese, it has iron in it. We've had some detects, as pointed out in this, of dioxins and furans. Yep. And so it's being looked at as a potential source along a pathway, potentially to other receptors, right? So you're looking at now where are the other problems, or are there problems in the Clark Fork, or there are problems in the deep system? But it's not being looked at as a potential beneficial use or beneficial use.
Did you say that no new wells can be drilled?
No new wells could be drilled on the site. Existing wells can be replaced, and existing wells can be used.
But that's a civil matter. If somebody drills a well, then the people who put that restrictive covenant have to sue them. It's not a legally restrictive outside of civil court. So that's just important in the context of what it means for people and what it means going forward. We have a lot of institutional controls that are actually put in place by DEQ on certain properties, and they get lost track of when people go to sell it. It's incumbent upon that person to tell that person. That doesn't always happen. That's a problem. That's why we're really hoping that instead of just using one of these like institutional controls, instead of that, we get it cleaned up.
It was a proactive management strategy by the former operator.
Is there, Nick had a question.
Yeah, so first, Bruce, that was a nice presentation. I had nothing to add to that. Thank you. I just have some anecdotal observations. I've been, in addition to being a hydrologist, I'm a fly fisherman. And I've been fishing the Clark Fork on a somewhat systematic basis for about 40 years. And the place I often go to is just upstream of 9 Mile Creek, upstream of the freeway bridges. And I usually go sometime in the middle of October. And I try to time it towards those Indian summer days when you can count on fly hatches, mayfly hatches, bringing the fish up to the surface. And you could just about set your clock on that on a sunny fall afternoon. About 1 o'clock in the afternoon, those fish would start rising, and about 3 o'clock, they'd quit. Well, the last time that I experienced that expected rise was in 2019. And I'm just kind of curious. It may just be your chance. I'm just not hitting on the right days or what, but I just wonder if something hasn't gone on in that lower Clark Fork between combination of Milltown Dam removal and perhaps some connection to Smurfit stone that has affected those fly hatches. The fish are still there, but the fly hatches just don't seem to be as dependable as they used to be. And I just wanted to bring that up since I had an audience here. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Katie, are you talking about the public water supply or wells?
No, I'm not gonna touch the public water supply. I'll let the rest of our department do that. I just wanted to clarify with ICs and things like deed restrictions. So we at DEQ work really closely with EPA to identify what those need to look like, and then we typically do file those. That then would go with if it's a deed restriction, it would go with with that property. So if it were to sell, that follows the sale of the property. And that's something that we have certain requirements in our role to make sure that it meets those certain restrictions and it's filed the right way and all of that. So I just wanted to clarify that. I'm happy to speak with anybody that has additional questions about that. Our attorneys certainly can as well, but we do, as far as like deed restrictions and those sorts of ICs, we do file those with the property.
Thanks.
I've just been thinking about this with them. This didn't happen.
It didn't?
Not really.
Did anybody else have questions? It is pretty hard to keep a meeting on time when all of the people charged with that are the people talking. So I just want to acknowledge that.
I guess I just have one more shot about, like, as a community group, what can we do to feel like we're part of what's happening? And the message I got tonight is that there is risk. It's been identified. We may not know all of the risks on site for now or in the future, but there is risk. The variables are how are we going to just say, oh, the risk is going to stay on this site and the receptors are going to be the flora and fauna and the people, or is the risk costing the PRPs money to clean up the site? There seems to be several pathways, and I think it's important as a community to make sure that the communities, understand how much power we have in reducing the risk that we made.
Yeah, and I think talking more about how the community can continue to be involved is something that we hope to have a conversation here in the next couple meetings. And so I think it's really an important time to clarify and make sure that the community knows what's going on and what's happening and how they can participate. We had a big push 2 years ago, and we were hoping for a lot out of that. We're still hoping for a lot out of that. We're still hoping that our concerns are allayed, but you know, the strength of our community is really what's gonna turn the tide. And that's part of the lessons learned in other Superfund sites as well. I don't know if that was the closing, or, you, Jerry, it sounded good.
That's a beautiful point.
Anybody else online or? All right. Thank you all for coming. Hopefully we'll see you again next month.
Great. Yeah.